Hello and welcome to my channel and to my first video of 2024. I hope you all had a very happy new year and a safe one as well. For 2024, I'm going to start out with a series that I'm going to just simply refer to as the project of the week. So I'm going to be selecting various projects mostly that will be taken from start to completion so that you can follow along. But the second part of that is also to get you as familiar as I can to Canvas Workspace. You can also learn along with me. You can design along with me, and hopefully you will become even more comfortable working with Canvas Workspace, because I'm going to include some of my own little things that I've learned along the way, some shortcuts, some tips and tricks. So I hope you enjoyed this very first video, and in this one we're going to be making a pop-up box, and I've decided to make this a Valentine's pop-up box in time for that big day coming in February. So, thank you so much for joining me for the start of this new year, and let's get on with it, shall we? We have here a photo of a pop-up box, and in this case it also happens to be a Valentine box, which is what we're going to be doing today, or at least what I'm going to be doing today. You can make whatever kind of pop-up box you like. You can follow along with me and do the same dimensions that I do, the same processes that I do, or of course you can do whatever you choose, because all of us have different shortcuts that we like to use in different processes. But if we look at this right now, what we see are 4 sides to this box. Okay, like we would with any box, of course. And in this case, as we see on the screen, we have 3 sides that fold down and 1 side that is actually the full height of the box. And that's what I'm going to be doing. Now, if you like, you don't have to do that. You could make all 4 sides fold down. You will also see that there are these pop-up elements which sit in the center, and those rest on tabs, which we will create. We also have the layer panels. So we have either panels that are the same shape as the sides, or we have sentiments and other embellishments. So you can make this as elaborate or as simple as you like. So let's get started, and we'll begin by creating the basic shape of our pop-up box. So the first thing I'm going to do is just get this off the screen, and I'm going to then select a shape. Now we've got a square here like we saw on the photograph, or we've got this one, which I like, which has this more rounded shape. Now the problem with this one is, of course, that the bottom is also rounded. So we need to square that off, and as we can see, there isn't a rounded shape here that has a squared off bottom, but we can make a shape, and we'll do that by bringing in this shape here that we had created. And it doesn't matter what size it is, as long as it encompasses the piece that we want to subtract from. Now, to make this work properly, though, we need to know the relationship between these shapes. So we need to know which one is on top and which one is on the bottom. So let's give it some color, and we can see that a little better. Right, so we see that the shape that is on the top is the rounded one, and that's because we added it second on our artboard here. So every time you bring a shape in, if I just bring another one in here, you'll see that if we give it some fill, you see that it is actually on top. So each time you bring a shape on or create a new shape, it's going to place it on top. So you need to keep that in mind. And what we're going to do, let's just make a little more room here, is select these two and go to Process Overlap. Now, if you leave it this way, this is what's going to result when you subtract. That is not what we want. We want the opposite. We want the bit at the bottom to be actually cut out from the piece at the top. So that means either sending this to the back or this one to the front. Makes no difference, just as long as they're in the right position. Because now when we highlight both of those shapes and use our Process Overlap Subtract, we get the shape that we want. It might not be the size we want yet, but it is the shape. So to get it to the size, all we need to do is to go to our width and height and put in the values for those. Now, I'm going to make mine 2 3/4 of an inch wide for each of those 4 sides and 5.5 inches high for all 4 sides. So that means I need to click off the Maintain Aspect Ratio and then put in the new values so that they can be independent of each other. So 2 3/4 by 5.5. And we have now our new shape. So what I'm going to do is I'll just make a duplicate of that so I can have that available to me later. Just going to change the color on this one. Right? And we're also going to need some panels or some layer panels which are going to sit on the sides. Now we might want some that are just the same height, so the 5.5, or we may want ones that are half the size, so they're going those flaps, either the top, the bottom, or both. So what I want to do is to make this layer 1/4 of an inch smaller than the main panels or the main sides. So I'm going to duplicate this. And I'll change the size to 2.5 by 5.25. So now you'll see, I'll just go over here and a different color here, and you can see when I bring that on to the main piece, we have this 1/4 of an inch border all around. I want some smaller ones as well, so what I'll do is I'll change this to 2.5 by 2.5. So that means I'll have a piece that could fit in here, and then I'm also going to bring in a square. And I can use my aspect ratio if you want, and I'll change that to 2.5 as well. And then that one could fit down here. So we can decide all that when we get ready to cut this out and assemble it. So what I'll do for now is just move these off the board here so that we can concentrate on this area and the building of the main box. So I'm just going to zoom in a bit, and we need 4 sides, so that means we need to make 3 more copies of this, and then we're going to align them so that we can then work on getting them welded together into one continuous piece. Now I could, if I wanted, just sort of see if I can get them to overlap how I think they should, or I could simply take advantage of my distribute space function and see how that works out for me. So I've got it aligned to the bottom, and now I'm going to distribute the space. Now at the moment it's 1 inch, but we can change that. We'll just bring it down to 0 and see if that's enough. Now in some cases, when you change the spacing to 0, it will be enough for it to weld together. Sometimes it won't. So what you need to do is just to hit weld and see if it works, and if it doesn't, then you can manually adjust it using usually your arrows on your keyboard. So let's try this. And it works perfectly, so that is great. So the next thing I'm going to do is something that I will typically do when I want to be fairly precise with placement of things like score lines and cut lines, as I'm going to do with this piece. And that is, I'm going to lock it onto my artboard. But I'm first going to place it somewhere where it's going to be the easiest to make my calculations. And that's going to be by placing it up here in the corner using the X and the Y axis values. And that places it straight into this corner here. Okay, so if I just zoom in, you'll see it's right up there in the corner. It is not inside of this red cutting line at the moment, but that doesn't matter because we're not getting ready to export it for any reason. We just need it placed there, and then we can lock it down by going to our layer, and we see our shape here. We toggle then the lock function, and that means we can't edit this anymore, right? We'll be able to edit it once we unlock it, but for now it's just going to stay put, and we can do what we need to with our score lines and our cut lines. So I'm just going to go back to my edit, and I'm going to zoom out just a bit. And the next thing I need to do is to make a glue tab for this. Now it's best to do it now before you put any score lines or any cut lines in, because those will be open paths, and if you try to weld this with those open paths there, it's not going to work. I'll just show you very quickly. If I were to, let's say this was a score line that I was going to have here, and now I want to add a tab. I'm just going to make it very simple by using a square. I'm going to make it like just a little more than ½ inch. Oops, not 52. Let's make that 0.5. Okay, so if I now move this where I want to weld it, and I'll just make sure it's overlapped, and I can actually align it to the bottom there as well. Let's select the shape itself. Okay. Okay, we've got to take that off the lock first before we can do anything there. So we've got to select both of these shapes, and we'll go to align to the bottom. Now, if I were to select all three of these shapes, that score line, the box, and the tab, and try to weld them, we're going to get this error message because there is an open path. And that is exactly what that score line is. So if we were to, let's just move that out of the way for a moment. If I click on there and open up the nodes, you'll see that it is an open outline rather than a closed outline. Then if you were to try to, let's see, let's take this and weld it to here, you would be able to do that. It actually gets rid of that line there because it is 0 in width, but it is now an open, it's closed path, not an open path. But there's no reason to really even bother doing that. All we have to do is be sure that we select only the shapes which are actual shapes. They actually have a beginning and an end. So when you look at this shape, for example, and we'll see it's closed. If you were to open it, it takes that end point. So it goes from the beginning of the shape all the way around and closes it up. So let's just get rid of this at the moment. Zoom that back out here. We'll delete that. And we can bring this back in here and line it to the bottom there. And we'll weld that together. Let's see, I think this hasn't overlapped enough, so we'll smooth that with the arrow key. And we've welded it together to form our basic shape. So now, I'm going to place that back in the corner where I had it before. And I'm going to lock it into place. Toggle the lock. And now I'm ready to add score lines and cut lines. Now, in this case, I'm going to leave one of my panels as which is the back panel, the full length of the box. So I'm only going to have cut lines, of course, down each of these areas here, but my score line is going to stop at this point. So it's going to be like 8 1/4 inches. If you wanted extended, if you want to extend it, then that means you would put your 11-inch line or score line, and then all 4 of those panels will have flaps on them. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to go into my path tool, and I'm just going to, it doesn't matter where I start, I'm just going to draw myself a line, and that is an open path, remember. I'm going to change it to a score line, and then I'm going to go back and I'm going to make it 8 1/4 inches in length. Then I'll place it at 0, so it's aligned to the left of the shape, and then I can put it at 2.75, which is half of the 5.5 height. If you wanted to make this a little bit smaller, you could just bring this in just a little bit. You didn't want it extended all the way like so. You can move that about. I'm just going to leave mine as it is. So now I am ready to also add a score line for this tab. And as I said, I kept it pretty simple. I've just left it straight. You can, of course, angle this if you like. You could add some more points in here, some more path nodes, and then use your mouse to manipulate it. You could even do something like this, where you could cut it out. So you would select only the main piece. Of course, you'd have to be sure it was unlocked. You can select that and that one, because you can see both of those are highlighted, and then go to overlap, subtract, and you can get yourself a little angle there. But I'm not going to bother with that. I'll probably just snip it when I cut it out, and then that way I'll know, exactly how wide I want it to be. So we'll now go in and do our cut lines. So I'm going to go back and lock it, and I'm going to add my cut lines. So just going to eyeball it from here. Now I can see that my mouse jumps a bit, so it's not quite the 000 width that I would like to have. I can try again, or one thing I can do is use the artboard and snap to grid. Then when I start drawing on this anywhere on the board, it's going to make a perfectly straight line, because you can see now, if I go back here, the width is exactly at 0. But that also means at this point you can only move it on the grid, which is 1 inch at the moment. So you need to make sure that you go back and toggle that back off so that you can place it where you need it to be. So I'm going to place it at, of course, 2 3/4, and I think I'll have this come up just a bit. Let's see. Here we are. Probably needs to be a bit higher. Looks pretty good. Let's see, maybe tiny bit more. There we are. So that should be really enough to create that flap. So the next thing I'm going to do is to repeat that twice. So I'll duplicate it, and I'm going to move it into position, and it's going to go at 5.5. And then if I want it to be in exactly the same spot, this is at 0.66. I can do this one at 0.66 as well. And then I can add my final cut line, which will be at 8.25. So as you can see, the score line only goes to that flap there. So this one is going to be a complete height. So it's going to be 5.5, where these are going to be 2.5 when they fold down. So what I'm going to do now, though, is, and I'll send this to the back. We need to do that score line too, don't we, for the flap. So let's do that now. So this is for the tab. This is for the glue tab. And I'll place that at 11. So I'm going to draw a score line. And I've left this all locked in place so that we can place these in position. I'll first of all change it to a dash score line. And I'll move that down a bit. Let's resize this just a little bit. Let's find that. There's that shape there. And we can make it a little bigger. All right. Sorry about the sniffles. Going to move that line up just a little bit here. Should be pretty good. Let's see. Okay, we'll move it just a bit more, or we can shorten it also. It will still fold perfectly. Duplicate it and move this one over to 5.5. Let's zoom out a bit. That one was it. We'll move that up also. And we'll repeat that. And place this one at 8.25. So we need to just go in here and duplicate that one. And that's at 8.25. Right, so that should be everything now. We have all our score lines in and all of our cut lines. So now we can unlock the main box and we'll just group all of this together. Is the main box complete. Now we can work on the pop-up elements. Now what I'm going to do here, I'm going to duplicate that, put that over here. I'm going to go back and change this. Well, it's 2, yeah, that one is still the 2 3/4 by 5.5. I'm going to change this though to about 4 inches instead. And then our pop-up elements are going to be attached here on this piece. So some will be maybe up at this section, some will be a little further down. And then we're going to also need to add some glue tabs. So the way I find it easiest to do that in this case would be to make this an inch wider. So 3 3/4, and then I will center it. Okay. Let's align it at the bottom here. Okay, so there we have our pop-up element. So we need to weld that, right? And just like we did with the main piece, we can move this up into the corner. Let's put that at 0. Lock it. And then I can come in with my score lines. Change that to a dash. To a score like that. And then I will position that at, oh, it's in the right place, at 1/2 inch. I'll duplicate it. And then I'm going to move it over here at 3 1/4. Let's move it down just a little bit there. So what I can do is group those two together. I will go ahead and unlock it for now. Right. I need to make another copy of this. And I'm going to change the size to 2.5. So let's see if I have to ungroup this first though. Let's change this to 2.5. And we can move these into place here. Oops. Right, so we'll group that one and we'll group this one. So we now have our main box, our 2 pop-up elements, and our layering panels. So 2.5, that one's 2.5, that one's 2.5. This one we can just go ahead and delete and finish with that one. Next I want to add some embellishments. So I want something that's going to go on one of the flap, on the front flap I should say, that I can have a sentiment on, like Happy Valentine's Day or I love you. And I'm going to take advantage of some of the shapes I've already got here in Canvas Workspace. So I'm going to bring in one of these shapes, I think. Let's see which of these appeals to me the most. See, I think this one will. And what I'm going to do is I want it to maintain its aspect ratio. And I'm going to bring it down to about 2 1/4. Because that means it should fit on this layer panel. So let's move that off. Come in. So that should fit nicely onto there. So what I'm going to do is use the offset function, which is here at the bottom of the editing column, and I'm going to use offset. I'm going to use an inward offset to begin with. Let's try about 0.12. I'll leave everything else as is. Alright, now what I'm going to do is select both of those shapes, and I'm going to divide rather than subtract where it punches it out. I want to keep this for the moment because I might do something else with it, so I'm going to divide it. Okay, it doesn't look like anything's happened, but actually what's happened is it's kept that inner part as well as the frame. So if I were to change that round, you'll see, and I want that actually to sit behind, so but I want this to be a little bigger, so I'm going to get back to offset, and this time I'm going to go outward. I'm going to go, I'll leave that spacing the same, see if that's enough to begin with. Okay. What I can do is place it behind here. Let's do that. Let's see if it's the right size. If it's not, we can change it. No, it looks pretty good. So I'm happy with that. So I can actually just delete this now. And then I'll look in the shapes again under words and see what we have that could be a Valentine. Let's see, I don't think there's not an actual Valentine, but there's true love. That's a possibility. There's also I love you. There's another I love you. And there's even a love. So we've got quite a few choices here. So I'm just going to zoom out of here. I think I'm going to get rid of that one. I don't want that one. I do like this I love you, which I could just turn that into a drawing file. So it's just drawn onto this shape that's behind it. The true love, that might make something really nice for the top panel, this one here. Could have true love here. What I think I would do though is I would duplicate that, and then I'm going to align it here so that it's in the center, and then I'll just punch it through. So now I have this piece. Oh, let's give it a completely different color. It can be pieced into here. or we could leave this just as it is, right? And then I have this piece. I'll get rid of that. I'm going to jazz this up just a little bit more. So what I'll do is I'm going to go into my basic shapes again. And here's a heart. Let's take a look at this. You can make that a little bit smaller. And I'm also going to tilt it. I'll duplicate it and then I'll flip it so that I have one here, I have one here. Select both of those and line them to the top. I'm going to group them. Let's see, how do they? Yes, I'll line those up in the center, and then I'm going to duplicate it. I don't want to duplicate the whole thing, I just want the hearts. Let's just go back and duplicate those. And then I'll flip them over vertically and place them like so. What I'll do is just eyeball that. I'll line them to the left there or to the right there. And then I'm going to select all of those and use my subtract function to punch it out. So now, let's bring this in. I'll line that as well, centrally. And put it in the middle, and I'm going to leave it as a drawing, but rather than have it as an outline, I'm actually going to fill it so that when I bring it up on the machine, it doesn't really matter what color I put in here as long as I use a fill, then it is going to, the pen will actually draw and fill in this I love, the heart, you. And remember, when you are going to be drawing and cutting on your machine, you want to be sure you do your drawing first and then the cutting. So in this case, I will, of course, set this to draw on my machine. I'll cut that. I'll draw that first with my pen, and then I'll put my blade back in and then cut the bit behind it out. So hope that makes sense, and you will see when you bring it on your machine that this is going to be filled in. If you don't want that, then take the fill out. I do hope you enjoyed this and that you're having a go at it yourself. As I said, it doesn't have to be Valentine. It could be for anything. It could be Mother's Day. It could be Father's Day. It could just be for a birthday, any occasion whatsoever. So if you enjoyed this, please leave me a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm, of course. And I will see you again with another project of the week. Thanks for watching. Bye now. Bye.